are tuning into People Are Complicated. I am your host, Kirsten Moorfield. Today, I am talking with Jordana Cole. As we continue our mini-series talking with talent, learning, and development folks, Jordana has a rich career in talent management, learning and development, coaching, and she spun out on her own to start her own consulting practice because she was tired of L&D being a side project. She wanted to find more ways to make it strategically aligned with businesses, and she had had a lot of success doing that. And she'll share some of her stories of how she took a program where people weren't taking advantage of the few licenses they had to LinkedIn Learning, and how she built programming and just implemented it into the employee life cycle in a way where people not only were using what was available, but needed to quadruple what was available because they were just actually developing themselves and in an asynchronous e-learning way. That is a hard thing to accomplish these days with all of the noise out there. Jordana is a powerhouse, so easy to listen to, full of amazing one-liners, like how she talks about how empathy and accountability feel like they're opposite of each other, but actually you need to find ways to live in the tension, and you really need to find ways to help your managers live in that tension, because as with almost all of the conversations I have with learning and development and talent management folks, almost everything comes back to feedback and difficult conversations and helping our people be able to lean into the discomfort there, because that is really where we grow and we become the best version of ourselves. So I'm really excited for you to get to listen in on this conversation with Jordana Cole. Jordana, it is so good to reconnect with you. I want you to start off by sharing, why are you doing what you are doing today in your life?
That's such a great question. Thank you for asking that. So I spent the last decade of my career internally as an L&D leader across a number of different industries, from e-commerce to technology to financial services. And I'm really proud of what I accomplished in those industries. And at the same time, I started to realize more and more how L&D has kind of been this nice to have for a lot of companies. Even when we're trying to position us as a strategic thought partner, we don't bring in revenue, we're overhead costs. So when budgets are tight, it's the first thing to go, and we're constantly fighting for resources and attention span. I was able to successfully do that, and I was able to successfully do that across different industries. I'm also somebody who loves to make impact. So I said to myself, you know what? I can only make a certain amount of impact in one organization. I want to move beyond the metaphorical four walls of one place and move from the core of what I do being a nice to have to having control over that being a must have. So I combined my LD experience with my master's degree in applied positive psychology and my background in human behavior, and started my own business about 2 years ago called Ignited. And I'm really kind of triple threading L&D, coaching, facilitating, consulting, to help organizations spark transformation that doesn't just stick, it spreads. That's kind of my MO behind everything that I do.
Do you feel like you are less of a cost center nice to have and more strategic now?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, it's interesting because I do think my experience internally helped that, because I kind of consider what I used to do as entrepreneurial, and now I'm just entrepreneurial. So, talking about needs, identifying ways to make that business case within a singular organization, but now I can do it more broadly externally. And there is something, I think, with our human brains where sometimes we feel like we need those resources from the outside. That outside expertise feels a little bit different than when it's internal. So I can definitely be a strategic partner as a consultant with all of my clients.
Yeah, you're coming to the table as an expert, outside party. That totally makes sense. And by the way, I hear this from almost every single L&D person I talk to. Not quite everyone, but almost all of them. They feel nice to have, not just to like executives and decision makers, but especially just to the people they're trying to train, right?
Yes.
That's more of the pain point I hear.
I hear that too, and I've kind of created a metaphor around it where it's 100% of what we focus on. The people that we serve basically have 1% of their brain capacity to devote to it.
Yeah.
And we're fighting for that capacity with all the other stuff outside of their day-to-day priorities, how they're measured, etc. I'm always thinking about how do we make it easy for them to use that 1% for what we're trying to do.
Well, that's a perfect tee up to one of the only two questions I have for you.
Uh,
Jordana, when it comes to scaling people development at a large scale, what has been one of your biggest challenges?
yeah, the limited resources that we have in making that happen, right, makes that
Yeah.
really, really hard. And also the pace of business. So it's always about, okay, we need to do this, and now we need to move on to this topic. And now we need to teach people this, and now we need to move on to this topic. And
Yeah.
that's not how people learn. And it
Mhm.
creates overwhelmingness. Like I think about it like we're creating essentially hoarders houses in people's brains. It's just mental clutter of different topics that we're trying to
Mm.
send to them over and over again and moving on to the next thing. Instead of helping to compartmentalize it, instead of to help reinforce it, we're just adding net new. I think that the reason this is so challenging is because traditionally L&D is more transactional order takers versus strategic drivers, and we focus on the topic. This is the knowledge. This is the course. This is the thing instead of the behaviors. That's something that I try to bring into everything I do and would really encourage L&D leaders to think about. Instead of thinking about what piece of knowledge or what topic we need to teach, what are the behaviors that we're actually trying to change? And then designing with that in mind. And that's also going to change the conversations you have. It's going to change your approach. It's going to change the measures. It's not just about participation that's important here, it's impact. And that requires a lot of time, effort, skills, and hard work when you are a very small team. So, how
Yeah.
do you do that as a team of one or a team of few? I think is the constant challenge. And there's ways to do it, I promise.
Well, and added to that challenge is that you have 1% of people's capacity, right?
Yes.
And they are so busy. And they are also dealing with the pace of business, the exponential change, the technological changes, the reorgs is something I hear all the time.
Yep.
It feels like constant reorg. And I have a close friend of mine who's at a very large organization that reorged probably 9 months ago, and he still doesn't have a clear job, you know? Like,
Yeah.
so it's hard for, and he's trying to, survive. And I remember before the reorg at the beginning of the year, he talked to me about his development plan. He was really excited about it. That is out the window. Like he doesn't even have a team, That is a challenge, right? Let's then move on to success. How do you actually do that, Jordana? Which you can answer in one of two ways. Like you could give us a bunch of concepts because you see so much, or you could talk about one specific time. Like what is one great success or one great technique that has brought the most success in developing people at scale?
I'll share two very quick success stories and then talk about how I made that happen. So,
Right.
number one, I was leading an organization of about 2,000 people, and L&D was brought in internally for my expertise. And like many organizations, one of the things that they were doing is they had LinkedIn licenses and were just saying to people, go forth, go have fun, take the courses that you think will add value to you, go learn with everything going on, go find the time to learn and figure out what you want to learn, right? And occasionally there would be a specific course that they would recommend. We had 200 licenses for a group of 2,000 people, and like a fraction of them were being used. We had to incentivize with raffles and things like that for it to be used. We're going to bribe you to learn, but this is what happens in organizations, especially when it's things that people aren't asking for and we're asking them to do.
Yeah.
And in just a couple of years, I was able to not only leverage all of our licenses, but have to expand our licenses to about 1,000 people because I integrated LinkedIn Learning into everything that we were doing. And then the second thing that I'll bring up, for me, the biggest impact and success story is when I hear from somebody who I worked with 8 years ago, who reaches out of the blue to tell me, hey, that workshop you did, that program that I was in, I still remember this piece. I use it every day. I still have this on my wall. And that to me signals it's not just about the learning, it's about the behavior, and it's about something that's important to that person. So how did I do that? A couple of ways.
Tell us.
Here's the secrets. One, again, focusing on the behaviors. So I really spent a lot of time doing conversations and understanding the day-to-day reality of the audience that I was trying to serve. What are they struggling with? What are the things that they need? And also talking with our C-suite and senior leaders about what are really the behavioral changes that we need to see. From there, I was able to design programming that really hit on those things and helped connect the dots and provide context for people about this is what we're learning, this is why. This is what
Mhm.
I heard from you. This is what I've heard from others. This is how this helps, rather
Mhm.
than them having to do the mental leap. I integrated that in programs, and it wasn't just the only part of the program. So I created blending learning opportunities where people had LinkedIn Learning courses that they were integrating, but then they came together as cohorts to talk about it. And then we actually had practice and experiments and experiential things where they were putting it into practice and then coming back again to ask questions and talk about it. So it was
Mhm.
really applying it to their day to day. And rather than taking hour-long courses, very similar to what you're doing with this podcast,
Mhm.
finding the 5-minute snippets that are going to
Mhm.
teach them that one skill that they can immediately put into practice
Mhm.
and doing it in a way that is meaningful to them in the
Mhm.
work. So I created almost like these mixtapes as part of manager onboarding, as emerging leaders programs, but it was all integrated with the learning, the relationships and conversations through cohort experience, coaching, and then application. And by doing that, I kind of have this concept of we often think of L&D as like the gatekeeper to learning. I will tell you what you need to learn. I will give you access to what you need to learn. And I take an approach that L&D should be like a super spreader instead of a gatekeeper. If you think about how we do work today, it's through other people and it's with other people. But for some reason, we still struggle with L&D that I need to be designing and delivering and doing all these things and on this mountaintop instead of thinking about how do I get the learning done through and with other people. That's why a lot of what I've developed and designed that's been effective has been social learning through
Mhm.
conversations, has been identifying champions by creating small things that they can implement, bring back and talk about the wins immediately, iterate and advance upon, and then I'm reinforcing that. It's a different framework, but it's all part of the same skill set. It's building on the wins that they've done, very similar to habit formation best practices. You start small, you build, you build, you build, you build, and
Mhm.
allowing them to go out and spread the message, giving them tools and
Mhm.
saying, bring this to your team, share this with other people. If there's somebody else you think could benefit from this, have them connect with me, share your wins, and I'm going to really champion those in the organization. Rather than me telling the story of impact, I'm bringing them into those meetings. I'm bringing them into the programs when I've got multiple cohorts to share how they've used these things, to provide support to each other, to answer questions. Let them be the carriers of the knowledge. Let them be the carriers of the message rather than just focusing on us.
So you need evangelists that aren't you, right?
Correct.
I think also a key thing that you said at the very, very beginning is you talk to people and you understand what their needs are.
Yes.
And then you frame your work to that. Hey, I've heard 78%
Yes.
of us need XYZ, so we're doing this, getting like you're getting their intention and then you're reminding them this is your intention, right? So it feels like a service to them, not a requirement of them.
Yes, I love that you called that out. And it's funny. I kind of go back to my background in psychology where we love using stats, but
Mm-hmm.
people are actually emotional creatures.
Mm.
And story has huge impact. So I start with story and
Ooh,
then
how
back it up
so?
with the stats. Okay, so I'll give you an example. And this is also something that I think L&D need to do more of is experience the work. So
Yeah.
I was working with a production facility where they're on the floor, shift work, manufacturing things all day long. And, traditional LinkedIn learning and stuff like that doesn't work because they don't have computers. I had to understand the work that they did to better translate and think about how I could actually use different techniques with them. And rather than just talking to their leaders, I spent a day on the floor and told them to put me to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. So then when I was sharing back to them what we were focusing on and how we were doing, I was able to say, hey, when I spent that day shadowing you, I realized that you only have 5 minutes here and there, that you're on your feet 100 out, not 100 hours a week. That's an exaggeration, but you're on your feet. But I noticed that you have earbuds in your ears, and we can learn via audio. So
Mhm.
I talked to so and so, and they were telling me about how they were listening to a podcast on X, Y, and Z, and this is what they learned, and how they were
Mhm.
immediately able to apply it with their team environment. So
Mhm.
because of that, we're going to focus on using podcasts as a mechanism to do X, Y, and Z. And then we're going to talk about it. What I also heard in being on the floor was difficulties in communication across different departments. So, you shared X, you shared Y. And because of that, and based on then the survey data that we have, we're going to focus on communication in across teams. And here's how we're going to do it in a way that works for you.
That's so empathy building.
Yes. And it's interesting, that idea of empathy, because there's a difference between empathy and compassion. There's a great metaphor from a researcher by the name of Paul Bloom, who has actually a book called Against Empathy, which is a fascinating book. And what he talks about is empathy is, imagine you're a lifeguard and you see somebody drowning in the water. You actually have to physically feel what it's like to drown to help them, which means that you can no longer help them because someone has to help you because you can't breathe, you can't move. Compassion is being able to recognize that somebody is out there and drowning and that they need help without actually personally taking it on yourself. In the L&D space, we kind of need both because we can't get out to every single person and every single need. We can recognize that people need help with certain things and be able to provide support that they need. And I think that's the approach that we often take. And as much as I love Paul's research, I think we need a little bit of empathy, especially in the workplace. It's very hard to understand what an individual needs if we haven't been in their shoes. And that doesn't mean we have to actually have done their work, but it means that we have to be willing to step into their life for a little bit, to understand what their day-to-day reality is, to understand what gets in their way, to understand what's important to them, to understand what they need, and then to be able to translate what we're doing back to them. Because if we can do that, I promise you, not only will we get evangelists, but we will also get programming that's way more effective than what we're doing right now.
Oh my gosh, so good. Okay, Jordana, I want to end on one thing on the topic of empathy. You and I have talked before about empathy and accountability. They aren't separate. So I want you to leave us with that nugget.
Yes. In the workplace, it's becoming increasingly important for us to do both. Lead with empathy, lead with accountability, care for people, care for results in the business. We treat it as an either or, and we tend to do this seesaw back and forth. It's a natural tension. It's not a tension that we can solve for. That's not something that you should try to do. It is something, though, that we can better balance and we can learn to more effectively lead with. So do both. You can. It requires micro improvements, but you can do it.
You can't, I love it. You said to me last time we talked, you can't solve the tension, but you can learn to live in it.
Yes.
And part of why I also bring that up now is because a consistent challenge I hear from L&D folks is we've done the training, we've done the needs assessment, we've tried to do all of these things, and yet still our managers don't know how to coach their people. They are not giving good feedback. They are not giving consistent feedback. They're not recognizing wins. They're not giving, recognition. They're not, it comes down to this relationship of the manager and their direct report, whether that's like a director and, the managers they lead or, at every level, the leaders are struggling to give feedback, to have critical conversations. And whether that's positive feedback or negative feedback, people don't feel like they are getting clarity on how they are doing and where they need to improve and where they need to keep doing great. And part of that, I think, comes down to managers are stuck trying to balance, I care for you. Oh my gosh, I'm way too busy. I'm doing too many things. I don't have time to develop you. But also, we got to hold accountability, but I don't know how to hold accountability. I'm because there's different styles, different people receive and give accountability in different ways. And it all comes down to this tension that is never going to become easy. It's not going to be removed, but we can learn to live in it. Everything that you and I talked about, that was in the back of my mind the whole time. Yes, we need to understand where they're coming from. Yes, we need to have empathy and compassion. Yes, we need to build for the behavior change. Yes, we need to spend a day in the life. And at the end of the day, we also can never fully solve for everything. We have to just better understand the context, deliver to the context, help them solve their biggest problems. Also often change day to day because the
Yes.
pace of business, like you said, the pace of business, the pace of technology, the pace of change is impossible to fully wrangle and put our hands around.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're right. We can't solve for that tension of empathy and accountability, and we can learn to live with it. And I think tensions are a natural part of our jobs and our world. And we're constantly going to be facing them. And managers have a really hard job right now. It's getting harder and harder.
Yeah.
And, we expect individualized attention on everything. The pandemic made the lines between personal and work blurred. They were never real lines, they were fake boundaries, but they
Mhm.
became increasingly clear. And to your point, that's not just something our managers face, that's something that we face in the L&D world as well. We would expect accountability for results when it comes to the business. We need accountability for the behaviors that we expect of our leaders as well. And that's not something that we can drive on our own. That's something that needs to really be believed by leadership at the
Mm,
top and be something that's part of how we actually measure, how we reward managers
mm.
today. There's only so much that you can do on your own. And one other thing I'd say about the tension is I think there's often a tension of they. I'm putting this out there, but they aren't doing it. There's this us versus them mindset that we have a lot instead of
Mhm.
thinking about it as a we. And that's, I think, there's so many ways that we can bring our people into the design process. And
Mm.
part of that is the accountability. Rather than assuming or creating accountability for the people we're trying to serve, how do we bring them into the conversation and say, we need to solve for this together? The feedback, we're all struggling with feedback. What do we need to do differently about providing the context and approach for you? Because clearly it's not working right now. And what can we do differently to create accountability around it? Not just me, we. I think that's language that we need to use more of. Let's be
That is
part
so
of the
powerful.
solution.
That is so powerful. When I was in college, there was a communication class. I remember in the class, they were talking about how in conflict, when people say you, the whole conversation shifts when you say we instead. Instead of like, hey, you're not hearing me, you say, hey, we aren't hearing each other, right? And there was a preacher man who came, like on college campuses, how there's these like angry
Yep.
preachers who come and say, you're all going to hell. I, in my early 20s, thought I could have a conversation with him. And I realized he kept saying to me, you. And I was thinking about this class, and I said to him, hey, we don't seem to be able to hear each other right now, or whatever I said. I remember I said we, and it totally flipped the conversation. Even with an angry preacher man, he actually started to listen a little bit more. So that one stuck with me forever. Jordana, I could talk to you for another hour, but I am late to our leadership team meeting. But thank you so much for joining me today. And I know this is going to be a gift to your peers out there who are really trying to help scale people development, help people become their best selves. So thank you so much for your time and for your insight today.
Thank you for having me. I love the conversation.
Thank you for tuning in to this special episode of People Are Complicated. As with everything we do here at Cloverleaf, this mini-series has been a labor of love with many cross-functional folks involved. So special thank you to Evan Schultz for helping to set up things that really got us guests in the door. Thank you to Nicole Tiffany for video production, video editing, design, thumbnails, all things that have made this look good, including this mural behind me and the lighting around me. And also thanks to Evan Doyle for all the execution support you get to make this a thing that happens, that is published out in the world, that is seen on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And also thanks to Jake Owens for video editing support on getting this out on socials. I also want to say that if you are a talent learning and development person and you want to be included on our episodes, you can always reach out to me just directly on LinkedIn, Kirsten Moorfield. That's the best place to really find me and get in touch with me. Just DM me there, send a connection request. If you are also interested in what the heck is Cloverleaf and what do we do, let me tell you. This episode is brought to you by the company that I run in my day job, Cloverleaf.me. I am the Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of Cloverleaf, where we have invented what we call automated coaching. We take the common behavioral assessments and strengths assessments like Clifton Strengths, DISC, Enneagram, 16 types, what you've already invested so much into, and we turn it into just-in-time coaching nuggets that are pushed to people in the tools they work in every day. So Slack, email, Microsoft Teams, calendar, and we coach people on how do you do your best work today? What are some blind spots you might have? What are just nuggets that you need to know to be successful? But of course, nobody works on an island. We work through each other, with each other. So the most important aspect is this communal collective development that we have created where you are getting coaching on the people around you. Who are you going to meet with? What's the group dynamic in the room? If you're having conflict with somebody, just type in what you need help with, and our tool will give coaching to your folks right there in the flow of work. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can find out on cloverleaf.me. And of course, if you have enjoyed this episode, if you've gotten any good nuggets out of it, or you know other people who you would like to share it with, please just share it directly, share it on your LinkedIn or wherever you prefer to be social on the internet. And of course, leave a review wherever you are listening or watching this. If you leave us a review, it really helps more people find us. Thank you so much for tuning in. More next time.